Alrighty, folks. So we are going to keep going here with our second Unit 6 video here. It's about the Gilded Age. And you may recall that whole name was given ironically by Mark Twain because although this era looks like an era of money being made and businesses expanding, in reality, it was overall a really bad time if you were anything but very rich. All that glitters is not gold. All right. So, looks like a lot of stuff on this list right here, but really it can all be answered relatively quickly here. So, a lot of it is, government intervention bad in this era, and if you're poor, deal with it. All right. So, let's see. Feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. All right. Now, we saw that after Reconstruction, the government's overall attitude towards getting involved in the day-to-day affairs of Americans is going to be very different. Basically, during Reconstruction, we saw the government was heavily involved. We saw that was the direct intervention of the affairs of the South. They are doing things like the Reconstruction Act, dividing up into military districts. We saw that many in the South feel overall oppressed. Slowly, those Southern redeemers take power, and then after Hayes gets, elected in the Compromise of 1877, Reconstruction is over. So, what ends up happening is that in the years afterwards, there's a general feeling of hands-off government, laissez-faire, which is French roughly for leave them alone. And so basically, there is now a growing idea here of less government intervention is the right thing to do. The South certainly thinks so. More on that in a sec. But the other reason why the Republicans lost power is because there was a bunch of scandals in this era. As we kind of saw in the last video too, is that a lot of people are kind of trying to make up scandals. I mean, no, sorry, trying to make up legitimate things to get involved with the government with to basically just pocket money for themselves. People are getting into politics for their own personal gain to get rich in this era here. And the Republicans are seen as the corrupt party, even if the Democrats were literally the Confederate Party. Um, now, to make matters worse, we saw that economically a lot of people are in dire straits because of that withdrawal of greenbacks, which kind of triggered that crime of 73 when people had to take out loans and then couldn't pay them back in silver. So overall, this whole era, it means that banks had a lot of power and everyone else couldn't really make enough profit to pay off their loans because the prices went down thanks to all the money going away. So inflation's bad, but deflation is sometimes even worse. All right. Now, all this hands-off government is going to really manifest in the South, especially, and that's part of the idea of what we mean by the New South. Now, basically, what this term actually refers to is an industrialist who wanted to basically say that the South has to move on from the old economic system. They have to adapt, allow for manufacturing to appear in the South. We have to allow for more diversified economic gains. We can't just base our entire economy on cotton anymore. Um, Naturally, this is effectively a threat to the established order. Even after the war, there is still the firm belief that the hierarchy must be preserved, and that's one reason why Reconstruction was so unpopular. It was a threat to that hierarchy. And so, we saw in Unit 5, there's a lot of different ways how that manifests, and it's partly due to things like the black codes, the apprenticeship laws, the literacy tests, poll tax, grandfather clauses. So effectively, it is still relegating African Americans to a secondary position in society, and that was probably most manifest in the idea of sharecropping, which you saw last unit. So those are all still very much going on in Unit 6. But what we are also seeing is laws now being passed to segregate society. Literally the beginning of the idea of like whites only areas in businesses and colored only areas in other places. Now, these laws are being implemented, but they're not consistently across the board. So it's very different between business to business and state to state. Realizing the inconsistency, we're going to see that there will be an attempt to challenge those laws in court with Homer Plessy. You may recall he was the man who is 7/8 white and 1/8 black, which classifies him as black in Louisiana law. So He goes onto a whites only car in Louisiana, declares that one of his grandparents was black, and then is told to move to the black cart. And when he refuses to do so, he's going to be arrested. And so he's going to sue. Now, per all of this, they are going to rule in Plessy v. Ferguson that segregation of this type by race is actually not against the Constitution. They're going to say that this does not violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment because they're going to ensure that although the races are now being kept separate, they have to ensure that equal facilities are being provided for both races fairly. So that gives rise to that famous phrase there, separate but equal, which we heard throughout all of segregation. And so, in reality, this is a huge loss for civil rights. This is the death blow for almost all of the gains made during Reconstruction right here. Because now, with this legal precedent, the 14th Amendment is far weaker. So we see that now society is being segregated everywhere. These Jim Crow laws, which are now much more formal and widespread versions of the Black Codes, they are now appearing at first in the South and then across the whole country. The North is not a beacon of civil rights either, remember. And so during this era, African Americans had a taste of freedom, and now it's being stripped away. And so, naturally, with the idea of slavery not being around anymore, African Americans have far more say in their own advocacy. And that's partly due to the fact that a black middle class is now actually appearing. So, there are educated African Americans, there are wealthy African Americans, there are business owners who are African American. So, the question is, what can this group do to overcome segregation? Most of the leaders at the time, they were in fan of gradual accommodation. That just little by little, incremental, step by step, they are going to gain their rights. But obviously, this is insulting to people who just lived through slavery and are just being told to just tough it out. So during that time frame, we see that there are two civil rights leaders of different makes, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And yes, that is how you say his name. So Booker T. Washington, he is a self-made man. He's a businessman, so he has some credibility to what he's about to say. And what he says is that the way to overcome segregation is not by focusing on fighting for civil rights and playing the political game, but instead by teaching African Americans financial independence. He wants African Americans to learn skills that they can make money with. And in his mind, for the masses of African Americans, that is through trade skills, useful jobs that are blue collar in nature, things that require working with your hands, that are specialized skills that are not easily replaced, but people don't really want to do. And so these kinds of jobs here, they are a key to make money. And with it, he believed money would then lead to influence. Money leads to power, and people listen to people with money. So he believed that was the way to force political change is by kind of rising above the economic class many African Americans find themselves in. But he also said to cast down your bucket where you are and effectively just kind of deal with segregation. So that was rather unpopular. But he was actually more popular than the other man, at least in the early time during this era. W.E.B. Du Bois, he was in favor of a talented tenth of elite African Americans fighting for civil rights. And if you want to be part of that talented tenth, get an education, get into politics, fight for change now, and force the needle back the way that we just did. So his is the much more standard view of fighting for civil rights. It'll be kind of echoed by Martin Luther King, to use a more modern example, but that's much later. So these two have different opinions, and each one has the same goal, although they disagree. All right? Now, on this note, during the same era, we see that this kind of lack of sympathy for anyone who is not in the elite classes, it's kind of because during this era, social Darwinism is showing up here. That idea that Darwin's theory of adaptability of nature and natural selection, that those concepts should be applied to human society. And that's where we get the phrase survival of the fittest. If you are meant to survive, you will find a way to overcome. And if you're rich, then you already did it. Congrats. You're one of the elite. You're part of the better society. You are biologically superior in every way. And if you are poor, either you're going to die because you're inferior, or you're going to rise above because you're actually built different. So the whole era was handouts and charity are against the laws of nature. And it's during this kind of heartless era that the rise of big business happens. Industrial capitalism is now a norm as little by little these huge businesses become even huger and slowly gobble up their competition. And so we saw those are the ideas of trusts and monopolies here. Again, trust, it's like a group of business artificially controlling an entire industry, like how there's really only like, two cell phone companies in the modern day, or monopolies, where effectively one business controls the whole industry, like Amazon. And so what we see is that the way that these arrived was through different types of business hostile takeovers, either vertical integration, where you go backwards and take over every step of production for your business, uh, or horizontal integration, where you just take over all of your competitors until you're the only option, even though you don't do any behind the scenes stuff. These were both made famous by people like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. And effectively, they used these tactics to become billionaires at a time when that was an unheard of amount of wealth. This is more wealth than we've seen in the hands of one person in any era of human history up to this point, especially people who were not born into nobility. Um, so, during this era, the historiography really matters because the beliefs were quite different. For example, the neocon interpretation is that these business leaders are captains of industry, that they are self-made men. They just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and they earned every penny of their wealth by ingenuity, hard work, and just, good old-fashioned elbow grease. And so what we see is that there was some slivers of truth to this where some of these men did in fact multiply their wealth several times. Although some of them had good luck, some of them were already born rich, some of them, resorted to shady practices to do so. And perhaps the biggest thing, though, is that there were some that did believe that when they had that much money, that they did not have to spend it all on themselves. Andrew Carnegie is going to write a book called The Gospel of Wealth, and he believes that it was rich people's job, their God-given expectation to use their money to better society, not by giving out, handouts, but in the social Darwinist kind of way of those who are meant to rise will help themselves. So let's provide opportunities to do so. Let's do funding for public universities, public libraries, foundations to help fight disease. So let's remove the obstacles so that if you are really meant to rise, then you can actually become as wealthy as myself, Mr. Andrew Carnegie. And if you can't, well, then that sucks. So these do actually have a big impact. They actually do help people get better education. Some universities in the modern day, like Carnegie Mellon University, are around because of these things. Carnegie Hall, the Rockefeller Foundation wipes out yellow fever almost entirely. So they do actually have a lot of good. But the other mentality is that these people are robber barons, and that was shown through their lavish spending, the conspicuous consumption, where they just have all kinds of elegant dinner parties and houses with 45 bathrooms. And so they're just way too greedy. Billionaires should not exist. That's the other side to that point of view. Now, this is all happening because there's hardly any regulation on big business. And so the attempts to do so are really handicapped from the get-go. Part of it involves the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, and they were trying to ban monopolistic practices so to kind of stop the forming of monopolies or to stop them from artificially corrupting their industry to make their monopoly last longer. Um, Now, all they could really do was sue, and they did have kind of a scaling punishment here, so it was effective in theory. But we will see that immediately the scope is narrow thanks to things like innocent monopolies, where if you genuinely earned your monopoly, meaning you can't prove it wasn't illegal what you did, then hey, they can't touch you. The other was the US versus EC Night Company is going to say that the Sherman antitrust only applies to commerce, that final step of the business, not the behind the scenes like manufacturing. And so they're going to notoriously allow a sugar refining company, the EC Nightco, which has a 98% control of the entire sugar refining industry, to go unregulated. So the government is that hands off. It is that not willing to do anything about any of this. All right. So yeah, this era here, government is 100% a fan of big business, and this is kind of the beginning of that idea of corporate personhood. Your corporations are people too, and they have the same rights that you do regarding spending their money however they like. What else? Let's see. So, obviously, this is going to be very unpopular for several different groups of people, and we will see that the workers who are making these billionaires their money are going to start to feel taken advantage of. That's going to result in the rise of labor unions, where we will see the people kind of banding together in the same workforce to demand better conditions. They want higher pay. They want shorter hours. And if they're really feeling like they really want to go for it, they might even ask for better conditions, safer conditions. Because there's child labor right now. We have kids crawling into machinery, kids getting their fingers chopped off by some choppy thing in the area, and no 8 hour workday, no weekends. It is a horrible existence to just be stuck with wage slavery, as John Calhoun said back in Unit 4 to justify actual slavery. But anyhow, early attempts, the Knights of Labor are going to try and form here. And they are a very idealistic group here, perhaps too much so, because they wanted to form like an entire commonwealth here. Everyone of uh, almost any background was allowed except for Chinese people. But they allowed African Americans, they allowed women, they allowed unskilled and skilled workers. And that meant that this whole group was not on the same page. You know, some just want an 8 hour workday. Some want to overthrow capitalism entirely in favor of, I don't know, socialism, anarchism, communism. It is very unclear what they want, but the idea is clear that something needs to change. And so we'll see that their most common form of resistance here is going to be in the form of worker strikes. And they are going to have, sadly, not the real effect they were hoping for. These strikes, they are going to shut down the businesses whenever they happen, but the business owners are going to respond very unfavorably. They will often respond via sending in police or private mercenaries like the Pinkertons, um, or they will have refused to budge and sent in scabs to force the factory back online. Um, and in one notorious instance, we'll see that it involved a police skirmish where police are going to attack the strikers because the strikers were attacking some scabs. And that'll even result into a whole riot over multiple days. And eventually, a bomb is thrown into the crowd where over 100 people die as a result of the chaos and the shooting that happens afterwards. And that's going to cause the Knights of Labor to decline because they are given the blame for that incident. Um, Now, eventually, the American Federation of Labor will rise from the ashes of the Knights of Labor, but they're going to learn their lesson and they're going to limit their power to only skilled labor because, again, skilled laborers have an easier time going on strike because they're much harder to replace. They actually have a skill that can be leveraged. They're also going to focus much more on just getting immediately better conditions, and they're going to do it via collective bargaining. All right. Um, Anyhow, a lot of the lower class believe that there's something wrong, that something needs to change. People are noticing the way the government raises its money is a little silly because, again, before this, it was all very limited. Taxation, it was just, I mean, all they could do was sell land, uh, get money from tariffs, and they could do it via real estate tax. We'll see that there are some attempts to make this better. A man named Henry George is going to propose a single tax on land, which would be a tax on rich people because they own a bunch of land. And there's a bunch of other writers that basically say capitalism is kind of awful in this era. Um, but ultimately, the only sliver of help is going to come from groups outside the government. We'll see more about muckrakers in our final chapter later, but there is also something called the social gospel, which is a bunch of urban Protestant groups that are directly trying to help out the poor. They are giving things like, providing food and clothing, or even places to stay if you're a child. So it means that in this kind of uncaring era, there is indeed some people trying to help. It's just those people are rare. All right. So yeah, the Gilded Age, a lot of money is being made in theory, but that money is going to the rich people, and it's just kind of staying there. All right. So we'll wrap it up there for now. We'll take a look at our final chapter after this. And yeah, stay classy, everybody. And yeah, have fun with your weekends and peace out. All right. Bye bye.